everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and today I'm going to be talking about my most anticipated thriller and horror book releases of spring of 2022. Believe it or not, it's spring, at least in the United States. I can't believe it's already spring. It really doesn't even feel like spring, so I keep forgetting it's spring. I kind of still feel like it's winter, but we are getting in the spring mood by talking about spring book releases that I am so excited for. At the beginning of the year, I did do a most anticipated video for the entirety of 2022, but as always, there are new books that come on my radar, whether that is just because I'm becoming aware of them or because new books get announced. So some of this is going to be a repeat of books that were mentioned in that original video, but there's also going to be a lot of new books, and this is going to be just a nice focused look at thriller and horror books. If that's what you like to read, you're in the right place. I'm going to try to mostly go in chronological order. It's not going to be absolutely perfect with days, but I'm going to go by month for both thriller and horror books so you can get an idea of what's coming out sooner and then later. But yeah, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. First up, coming out on March 29th, we have The Long Weekend by Jilly McMillan. This book has one of those like cheeky little intro sentences that says 3 couples, 2 bodies, 1 secret. And when anything starts like that, I am interested. This story follows a group of couples who are going away to this isolated retreat at Darkfell Barn. The women arrive for a girls' night ahead of their husbands, and what they thought would be a relaxing break soon turns to horror. Upon arrival at Darkfell Barn, the women find a devastating note claiming one of their husbands will be murdered. There are no phones, no cell service. Friendships fracture as the situation spins wildly out of control. Betrayal can come in many forms. This sounds so exciting. I love these isolated stories. I love mysterious notes being left behind. I love a good locked room mystery. So this one just sounds like a ton of fun. Next up, out on March 22nd from Tor Books, we have The Bone Orchard by Sarah A. Mueller. This cover is to die for. I immediately wanted to buy this book, but I resisted. I'm trying to do better about buying books just based off of the cover. But even the synopsis of this sounds really, really good. So you're following this woman named Charm, who is a witch and she is alone. She's a prisoner and a survivor. She is a whore and a madam. Except on Tuesdays, which is when the emperor himself lays claim to his mistress, Charm herself. Charm is also the only person who can keep an empire together, as the emperor summons her to his deathbed and charges her with choosing which of his awful faithless sons will carry on the empire by discovering which one is responsible for his own murder. So it's a bit of a murder mystery. It's a bit of the fantasy vibes of having this empire that's about to be taken over. And it says Charm must choose her dead emperor's will or the whispers of her own ghosts, justice for the empire or her own revenge. The genres for this one say fantasy, mystery, gothic, horror, paranormal, witches. There's just a whole lot of things going on in this one, and it sounds like a really good time. Next up, we have one that was put on my radar by my friend Savannah from the channel Riveting Reads. She got an arc of this book and she said it was really good. And as soon as she said what it was about, I was like, yep, adding that to my list. That sounds incredible. And that is My Dearest Darkest by Kayla Cottingham, which comes out on March 29th from Sourcebooks Fire. This book is being marketed as Wilder Girls meets The Craft. It's supposedly gothic and spooky and sapphic, and it just sounds incredible. The story is set at this competitive academy. You're following this main character named Finch Chamberlain. She is transferring to the academy, but she's not what she seems. Months before school started, Finch and her parents got into an accident that should have left her dead at the bottom of a river. But something monstrous and ancient and terrifying wouldn't let her drown. Finch doesn't know why she woke up after her heart stopped, but since dying, she's felt a constant pull from the school and the surrounding town of Rainwater, like something on the island is calling to her. Selena St. Clair sees right through Finch and she knows something is seriously wrong with her, but despite Selena's suspicion, she feels drawn to Finch and has a sinking feeling that from now on, the two will be inexplicably linked to one another. This sounds like it could be my new favorite book. I'm so excited for this one. I love all of these elements in the story and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Next up, coming out on March 29th from Minotaur Books, we have The Resting Place by Camilla Sten. This is a propulsive psychological suspense that is about this person with prosopagnosia, which is also known as face blindness, which was a big part of a recent thriller that I love, Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. So it's interesting to see this also coming up in this story as well. You're following this woman named Eleanor who witnessed her grandmother's murder. She saw the killer, but she can't figure out who it is because she has face blindness, and so she doesn't know how to recognize the person. Then she finds out that her grandmother left her house behind for her. It is a looming estate tucked away in the Swedish woods, the place her grandfather died suddenly, a place that has housed a dark past for over 50 years. So Eleanor goes to the house with her boyfriend Sebastian, her reckless aunt Veronica, and the lawyer. They all go looking for answers, but as they get closer to bringing the truth to light, they'll wish they had never come to disturb what rests here. I just recently read from this author for the first time. I read The Lost Village, and it definitely was not my favorite book, so I am a little bit skeptical of this one. I'm going in with a little bit of hesitation, but I am still interested in picking it up because it does sound nice and spooky. Next up, coming out on April 5th from St. Martin's Press, we have The Younger Wife by Sally Hepworth. I haven't gotten the chance to read from this author before, but I've always been interested in her stuff, so hopefully this will be my first book of hers that I get to read because it sounds super interesting. This is a thriller about a husband, daughters, the former wife, and the younger wife. So you're following this guy named Stephen Aston who is getting married again, but first he must divorce his current wife even though she can no longer speak for herself. So I don't know if she's in a coma or what is going on with her, but he's still married to this woman, but she can't speak for herself, and he's getting ready to marry this really young wife, but the daughters are not here for it. The daughters think that that woman is after their father's money, and they start to have suspicions about who their father really is if he's willing to just do all this while their mother is not able to do anything for herself. So this one's giving me Verity by Colleen Hoover vibes a little bit. I'm very interested to see what this one is all about. Next up, coming out on April 26th from Random House, we have I'll Be You by Janelle Brown. I love Janelle Brown's stuff. I've loved everything I've read from her in the past, so I'm super excited for another book from her. This one follows two identical twin sisters and former child actors who have grown apart until one disappears and the other is forced to confront the secrets they've kept from each other all along. I feel like I've also heard some people start to talk about this book with cult vibes. I don't know. I don't want to go in thinking too much about that, but I have heard that tossed around. I do also think, like most of Janelle Brown's other stuff, this one's probably going to be a bit more literary in the writing rather than like a super twisty thriller, so maybe just know that too. I mean, I don't even know that going in yet, but I do know that about Janelle Brown's writing is it's typically a bit more like a literary fiction with suspense and mystery elements in it rather than being a in-your-face kind of fast-paced thriller. But either way, I'm still super excited for it and I can't wait to check it out. Next up, coming out on April 12th from William Morrow and Company, we have Insomnia by Sarah Pinborough. From the same author of Behind Her Eyes, this is a story about this woman who is worrying that her crippling insomnia is a sign that she's slowly going insane, like the mother she's worked so hard to leave in her past. This one sounds really psychological. It sounds like it's also got some interesting dynamics between a mother and daughter relationship, which I really like to see too. So interested to see how this one plays out. Not really sure where it's gonna go, but the cover looks really creepy, so hopefully it's a pretty creepy one. Next up, coming out on April 26th from Graydon House, we have An Honest Lie by Tarryn Fisher. I've had a bit of a tumultuous relationship with Tarryn Fisher's thrillers in the past, but I'm still willing to give them a chance because I do feel like they're getting better every time. In this one, you're following this woman named Rainey who lives at the top of Tiger Mountain, a remote, moody, cloistered place in pine trees and fog. It's a sanctuary for a new life. She can hide from the disturbing past she wants to forget if she's allowed to. When Rainey reluctantly agrees to a girls' weekend in Vegas, she's prepared for an exhausting parade of shots and slot machines, but after a wild night, her friend Braith doesn't come back to the hotel room. And then Rainey gets the text message sent from Braith's phone, someone has her, but Rainey is who they really want, and Rainey knows why. I mean, it sounds really intriguing, but sometimes Tarryn Fisher's stuff just gets a little too messy for me, but I don't know, I'm willing to give it a shot. Hopefully it is very good and I can be super impressed by it. Next up, coming out on April 12th from Poison Pen Press, we have The New Neighbor by Carter Wilson. This is not an author I've ever heard of before. I don't really hear a lot of other people talking about this author or any of their books, but this one just kind of came up on my radar somewhere. And I really love the cover and I thought it sounded super interesting as well. Apparently it's also a standalone story that has crossover to a previous novel that he's written before as well, but you don't have to read that to understand this one. You're following this guy named Aiden who wins the lottery on the same day of his wife's funeral. So he has this like extreme high and extreme low of a day, ends up buying this huge new house for him and his kids. But then he realizes that someone is watching him and his family very closely, someone who knows exactly who they are, where they've come from, and what they're trying to hide, someone who will stop at nothing to get what they want. Stuart Turton also blurbed this book and said he really loved it, and I love Stuart Turton's books, so I'm trusting that opinion and hoping this will be a great time. Next up, coming out on April 5th from Tiny Reparations Books, we have Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee. This book is marketed as Ocean's 11 meets The Farewell, two movies I have not seen but sound interesting interesting to me. And it's a heist novel inspired by the true story of Chinese art vanishing from Western museums, about the colonization of art and the complexity of the Chinese American identity. I also love this cover. I love these bold colors. I love this like really bold blue paired with yellow. It also reminds me of the cover of The Other Black Girl, and I love that cover too. I just love that color combo. But I don't think I've ever read a heist novel before, so this will be something new for me, but I'm looking forward to it. It sounds really interesting. Next up, coming out on April 26th, we have Jennifer McMahon's new book, The Children on the Hill, which is apparently inspired by Frankenstein. I love this cover. I love that it's inspired by Frankenstein. I still haven't read Frankenstein, but I've read plenty of stories inspired by Frankenstein that I've loved. And it says it will take us on a breathless journey to face the primal fears that lurk within us all. You've got two timelines in this story. You're following a timeline in 1978 and a timeline in 2019. In 1978, you're following this brilliant psychiatrist, Dr. Helen Hildreth, who is also a grandmother. And one day she brings home a child to stay with the family, to accompany the grandchildren. And this girl does not behave like a normal girl. She is silent, hollow-eyed, skittish, and feral. And then in 2019, you're following this woman, Lizzie Shelley, who is the host of a popular podcast called Monsters Among Us. She's traveling to Vermont where a young girl has been abducted and a monster sighting has the town in an uproar. She's determined to hunt it down because Lizzie knows better than anyone that monsters are real, and one of them is her very own sister. Reading this reminds me so much of The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, which was one of my favorite books of 2021, so I'm super excited to read this one too. I think this will probably be my first Jennifer McMahon book. I have a couple other books of hers, but this is the one that sounds the most exciting to me, so this is the one I want to go into first. Next up, we have a horror novella from Tor that's coming out on April 12th, and that is And Then I Woke Up by Malcolm Devlin. This one is said to be a creepy, layered literary story about false narratives and their ability to divide us in the tradition of Mira Grant and Stephen Graham Jones. I actually have an arc of this one, so I'm super excited to get to read this one very soon. You know, I love a good horror novella, so hopefully this is another one that I can add to my favorites list. Next up, coming out on April 12th, we have Woman Eating, a literary vampire novel by Claire Coda. This is another one that I have an arc of, so I'm super excited to read this one soon. But in this one, you're basically following this biracial, half-human, half-vampire woman who must find a way to balance her mixed heritage, her bottomless hunger, and her life in this stunning debut novel from a writer to watch. The character you're following in this story is named Lydia. She is always hungry, and as she develops as a woman and an artist, she will learn that she must reconcile the conflicts within her between her demon and human sides, her mixed ethnic heritage, and her relationship with food, and in turn, humans, if she is to find a way to exist in the world. Before any of this, however, she must eat. Next up, coming out on April 22nd, we have an anthology, which is not something I normally read, but I'm super interested in this one, and it's called Revelations: Horror Writers for Climate Action. This one is edited by Sean O'Connor, and a couple of the authors featured in this one are Clive Barker, Richard Chismar, Tananarive Due, Joe Hill, Stephen King, John Langan, Sarah Langan, Josh Mallerman, Adam Neville, Sarah Pinborough, Paul Tremblay, so tons of authors that I've read from before, and others that I haven't read from before, but I'm super excited to check out their stuff. I really love climate and environmental related fiction, so this sounds like the absolute perfect collection for me. I'm not always the biggest on anthologies, but it's also horror, and I love horror in the short form, and I love so many of these authors, so I'm really excited to check this one out. Next up, coming out on May 17th from Berkeley, we have My Summer Darlings by May Cobb. This is the same author of The Hunting Wives, which I did enjoy when I read it, but it's not an absolute favorite of mine, so I'm a little bit skeptical on if I'm going to want to read this one. It sounds a little bit of like a sexy thriller, which is also what The Hunting Wives was, and I don't know if I'm going to want to read that again, but this one is definitely on my radar. You're following 3 lifelong friends plus a dangerous, sexy new stranger in town, adding up to a scorching summer of manipulation, obsession, and murder. It honestly sounds pretty similar to The Hunting Wives. You're following this group of women who have been friends since childhood. They live in this small insular Texas town. They all drink wine together all the time. And then this guy named Will Harding comes to town, moving into one of the neighborhood's grandest homes. He's mysterious and charming and seems like the answer to each woman's prayers, but none of them are ready for the way Will disrupts their lives. Honestly, it kind of sounds like The Hunting Wives meets the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires minus the vampire. So yeah, I'm gonna keep my eye out for this one. I'm gonna keep an eye out for early reviews and maybe I'll pick it up. Next up, coming out on May 24th, one of my absolutely most anticipated releases for the entire year is Hide by Kiersten White. Kiersten White is the author of one of my favorite books of last year, The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, which I was talking about earlier in this video as well. So I am so excited for another book from her, and this one sounds so different and so interesting and also just unique from everything else that's kind of been been coming out lately. It's set at this creepy amusement park, and there is this game going on that you have to play basically hide and seek and survive the night. There are 14 competitors, 7 days, everywhere to hide, but nowhere to run. And I cannot wait to read that one. Next up, coming out on May 17th from Tor, we have Just Like Mother by Anne Heltzel. This one's one of the creepiest covers I've seen in a while. Definitely freaks me out. In this story, you're following these women named Maeve and Andrea. They are cousins, and Andrea kind of disappeared for a while, but then she suddenly reappears, and Maeve regains the only true friend that she's ever had. They're spending more time at Andrea's remote Catskills estate. Andrea has made her fortune in the fertility industry, and the more Maeve immerses herself in Andrea's world, the more disconnected she feels from her life back in the city, and the cousins' increasing attachment triggers memories Maeve has fought hard to bury. But confronting the terrors of her childhood may be the only way for Maeve to transcend the nightmare still to come. This one has a really ambiguous synopsis. I'm really not sure where this story is going to go. It's supposed to be a full-length novel, around 320 pages, so super excited to check it out. Definitely cannot ignore something with a cover like this. Next up, coming out on June 7th from Sourcebooks, we have The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentile. This is also one of my most anticipated books of the year because it just sounds so fun. It's like a locked room murder mystery where there's all these strangers sitting together at this table in this library. Someone ends up getting murdered in the library, and it seems like one of them did it. And so they're all getting to learn more about each other and trying to figure out what happened in the library. It sounds like such a good classic mystery vibe, and I just love stories like this, so I'm really looking forward to this one. Next up, coming out on June 14th from St. Martin's Press, we have Can't Look Away by Carola Lovering. This is a sexy suspense novel about the kind of addictive, obsessive love that keeps you coming back no matter how hard you try to look away. This sounds like this story of obsession. You're following this woman named Molly who had married this guy named Jake, who was this famous singer. He wrote a song about her, and that's what blew him up. So they got married, they were super in love, but then they ended up getting divorced, I guess. And then you're following Molly a decade later. She's now married to this new guy named Hunter, and she has a daughter with him. She's feeling really lonely and out of place in the neighborhood. And then this woman named Sabrina, who is new to the town, comes into Molly's life and tries to really befriend her. But it seems like Sabrina has her own secret motives leading her to connect to Molly. And then a new version of Jake, the ex-husband's hit song, comes out on the radio, forcing Molly to confront her past and ask the ultimate questions. What happens when life turns out nothing like we thought it would? When we were young and dreaming big? Does growing up mean choosing with your head rather than your heart? And do we ever truly get over our first love? So not really sure where this story's gonna go, but it sounds like a good fun time. And then finally, coming out on June 7th from Tor, we have another anthology. I know this is a weird thing for me to be excited about, but there's a couple that are just really exciting to me this year. And this one is Screams from the Dark, 29 Tales of Monsters and the Monstrous, which is edited by Ellen Datlow, who is one of the biggest editors in the horror anthology world. A couple authors contributing to this one that I've heard of include Joyce Carol Oates, Stephen Graham Jones, Cassandra Caw, Jeffrey Ford, John Langan. So a couple authors I've heard of, but most of them are authors that I have not read from before. So excited for the opportunity to read a little of a selection from a bunch of different authors. It says these stories run the gamut from traditional to modern, from mainstream to literary, from familiar monsters to the unknown and unimaginable. I'm also not the biggest creature feature type of horror reader, so I think this could be something new for me to explore a little bit and try to understand what I like in horror. Again, I just love short form horror, so hopefully these horror anthologies are something I can really start to get into this year. So that is it for all of the thriller and horror releases for spring that I am looking forward to. Let me know down in the comments below which ones you're looking forward to the most out of this list, or if there's any that weren't on my list that maybe I don't have on my radar yet. Definitely let me know so I can keep an eye out for them. And if you've made it to the end of the video and you want to leave an emoji in the comments to let me know, today's emoji is going to be, let's just do a stack of books, a classic book stack for all of the many books that I'm getting ready to add to my TBR. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!